Hello, this is Bill Webb, aka Billy Indiana. And yesterday was the first day of summer, so today I'm going to go through 12 games that you could play outdoors during these summer months. But before I get started, I want to let you know about a collaboration video I recently created with Alex from Might I Suggest a Game. In that video, I gave 3 additional games that you could play outdoors, as did Alex. So if the 12 that I show you today aren't enough, check that one out and you'll get 6 more. But for today, let's get to my list of 12. So I've taken these 12 games and then I've divided them into 4 categories based on the style of gameplay, the size of the box, the number of components, and the complexity of the game. But one thing they all have in common is you can play them outdoors because they aren't card-driven. You won't have those cards blowing around in the breeze. Instead, these are tile-driven games, or the games are just made of cardboard pieces and wooden pieces that are easy to play in the great outdoors. The first category in this list of games you can play outdoors are the story-driven narrative type. And first up is Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective by Space Cowboys. In this game, it just comes with a rule book and then a case booklet. You've got a newspaper that goes along with the case potentially, and then you've got a map and a directory of people. So no real components, just these booklets and papers to pass around with your group. You sit under a tree on a blanket and read through the narrative, kind of choose your own ending style of gameplay, and see if you can uncover the truths of this mystery before Sherlock Holmes does. So that's the first one in this style, Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective. Next up in the story-driven narrative type, Legacy of Dragonholt by Fantasy Flight. And this game is one also where you've just got a story booklet, but you also are going to have papers. So maybe having a clipboard would be helpful because you're going to have to write on this paper. So that's the one limitation. There's a few cards and a few tokens, but you may or may not even need them depending on where you're at in the story. And you're basically going to be living out this fantasy-driven story in a kind of role player-ish kind of game. But you're doing it cooperatively, and it's, again, just a chance for you to enjoy the outdoors while you're reading through and choosing your own path in this Legacy of Dragonholt fantasy. The next category of games in this group of games you can play outdoors are those that have a little bit bigger box, in some cases a few more components, but because of the style of components and the style of gameplay, they still work really well outdoors. One is Santorini by Spin Master Games and Roxley Games. In this game, you just have the platform, and then you'll be putting up your building pieces, the lower piece and the middle piece and the top piece and the caps. And they're all nice little plastic pieces that wouldn't blow around very easily. And you're moving your little plastic meeple around the board to choose where you're going to build and how you're going to try to block your opponents. Plays best at 2 players, but technically you can go up to 4. And there are some cards that you can play with in certain versions of this, certain variants of this game, but you really only need 1 card per person, and they're big cards that wouldn't really blow around much. You could even tuck them under the edge of the game if you wanted to. So Santorini is one you can play outdoors pretty easily. Next in this second collection is Dragon Castle by Simon. And in Dragon Castle, you're going to have one bigger board that's got all these Mahjong-style tiles stacked up in a variety of different patterns you can choose. And you're going to each have your own player board, and you'll be taking the tiles off the center board and placing them onto your own board. You've got some little plastic shrine tiles that will go on top. And there are some cards you can choose to play with or not, but you only need 2 cards per game if you choose to use them. So there's not much to worry about in terms of cards blowing around or blowing away. And the 2 that you choose, you could kind of tuck under the edge of the main board and you could still see what they ask you to do. And the goal of the game is to build the best collection of tiles on your personal playing board. And they're nice big chunky tiles, so another great one that you can play outdoors, Dragon Castle. The next game in this middle collection is Between Two Castles of Mad King Ludwig by Stonemaier Games. And this is another tile-laying game, and you're going to be placing out tiles cooperatively, or at least semi-cooperatively, with the player to your right and the player to your left, and building up the floor plan, basically, of the castle for Mad King Ludwig. Now, it won't be a top-down view, it'll be a side view, so that's a unique aspect of the game, and you score the worst of the castles that you build, and so you're trying to have the best worst castle as you build them up. And because it's all tile-driven, no cards. It does have a fair bit of components, but they all come in really nice game trays to keep it organized and easy to pass around as need be. So this is another sort of bigger box game that you can play outdoors Between Two Castles of Mad King Ludwig. This next collection of games in the series of outdoor games are medium-sized boxes, so a little bit smaller, a little bit easier to transport, but still a fairly large number of components. So again, it depends on how outdoors and how remote you're going to be. But first up, by Lookout Games, is Barren Park. And in Barren Park, you're going to have one tile basically that represents your park, and you're going to be placing polyomino style tiles onto your park to try to match them up in a certain pattern, putting certain enclosures together, putting different river tiles together, putting your different food court tiles in the right pattern to create the best park to attract in the most tourists. So as long as you have a reasonably flat surface, it's not too hard to play, and the game board itself organizes all the tiles nicely. And if you invest in an insert, because the insert that comes with the game isn't great, that makes it even easier to play this outdoors. So Barren Park, the first one in this next list. Next up in the games from this portion of the list, Carcassonne Safari by Z-Man Games. Now, Carcassonne Safari is like the base game of Carcassonne in a sense that you're collecting tiles and putting them out in an ever-expanding safari, and you're trying to cluster them together to make long trails and large forest lands. But there's also these little wooden rangers, and it's a smaller box with not quite as many components as compared to like Carcassonne Big Box or something like that. And it has a couple little twists to it based a little bit different than the base game of Carcassonne. But it's very similar, and so if you've played Carcassonne and you want maybe a slightly smaller box with a little bit different gameplay, Carcassonne Safari might be just right for you. The last two games in this part of the list are two-player only games. First up, Caverna Cave vs. Cave by Mayfair and Lookout Games. And it's a game where you're going to, again, have a board of your own where you're building out your cave and you're putting other tiles on that board. And there's a tracker on the side where you're keeping track of your elements, your resources. But those resources are little cardboard or wooden meeple pieces to track. And so there's, again, no cards to deal with, just all tiles and wooden and cardboard pieces to move around. It's a little bit smaller footprint than some of those other bigger games, and a little bit easier because you're placing your individual smaller tiles on an individual board, kind of like Barren Park in that sense, but instead of polyomino, they're all square tiles. So it's pretty easy to learn and nice two-player game, and one you can definitely play outdoors. Caverna Cave vs. Cave. And the other two-player only game is Imhotep the Duel by Cosmos. In Imhotep the Duel, there's a central player board where you're putting your wooden meeples, and then each player has their own strip board where you're building up the 4 monuments to try to score the most points by the end of the game. And you do that by strategically placing those wooden meeples on the central board to fill up your boat tiles. So it's all cardboard tiles and wooden meeples. It doesn't take up a lot of space on the table, and it comes in a nice small box, easy to transport. Imhotep the Duel, another game that you may enjoy playing outdoors. The last collection of games in this list of games you can play outdoors are the smaller ones, smaller boxes, even very small boxes with fewer components, giving you even more variability on where you might be able to play them. So first up for Mayfair Games, Oceania, an older Klaus Tuber game, very simple. You've got a nice little board that's got a little map on it, and you're going to be putting your ship on the edge of the board in these circles, and then moving your ship around and placing tiles on the game, little cardboard tiles, trying to create routes and islands to score the most points by the end of the time when the board is filled up with those tiles. Very simple game for 2 players, really easy to learn and easy to play. And because it's just this central board with some wooden boats and tiles, you can play it in anywhere you can fit this little board. Like, that's all you need. So very flexible in where you can play this one outdoors. Next up, this is Patchwork Express by Lookout Games, and you could have any version of Patchwork. Basically, you're going to have your little patchwork board where you're trying to put together your polyomino style quilt pieces. They just lay out on the table. And one nice thing about this one is you lay out one set, and then when most of those are gone, you add some other ones at that point. So you don't even have to have them all on the table at once. So it takes a little bit less space for this express version, but all of them are pretty good. And again, it's another 2-player only game, but as you build out your quilt, you're scoring by having the most buttons in your collection, both on the quilt and beside the board. But it's all just little cardboard pieces, all these polyomino tiles along with your main board. So very easy to play in a variety of locations, and nice small box patchwork. And last but not least, or maybe it is the least, it's the smallest game, and that is Charte by Reiner Knizia and XV Games, or maybe it's 15 games, I'm not sure. Anyway, this is a 9-tile game, and you start off with a simple tile that has a compass rose on it with some land and some sea, and then you're going to be playing the other 9 tiles that all have some land and sea parts to them. You'll either play one or rotate one as you go. Once all 9 tiles are played, game's over. It's for 2 players only, and one player is trying to make the largest consecutive land sequence, and the other person is trying to make the largest consecutive sea sequence. So very easy to learn, very easy to play. You can play it in just about any place. 9 tiles covering a small amount of space, and that is Charte by Reiner Knizia. And there you have it, 12 games that you can play outdoors. Don't forget, check out that video by Might I Suggest a Game if you want to hear 3 more games from me and 3 more games from Alex that aren't in this list, but that you can play easily outdoors this summer. So if you enjoyed this video, it'd be terrific if you'd click on that thumbs up down below and give it a like, and it would be great if you would also subscribe to the channel. Leave some comments about any of these games or other games you enjoy playing outdoors, or if you have questions about these, ask those below as well. I'd be glad to interact with you in the comments. As always, thanks for watching. This is Billy, Indiana, signing off.
Huh.